Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 11th of April 2024. I've just been swearing very loudly at my computer. I've just recorded the entire video and it was on the wrong screen. So it's me talking about what was the final screen in my last video for the entire time, and I had loads of rants. I don't know if I've got the energy to do this again, but I will because it's an important one. Right. Okay, we're going to start with France. France talks tough on Ukraine while gobbling up more Russian gas. So this is the idea, and I'll be a bit quicker with this than I was before, sorry. But France is still buying a shed load of LNG, liquefied natural gas, and it's because basically they're caught in contracts with Total Energies, who's their big energy company, and contracts with Russia to take on this LNG, whilst at the same time they're shouting about, like Emmanuel Macron's shouting about how bad Russia are and how much we need to support Ukraine. So loads of people are criticising France for, talking the talk but not walking the walk, and that is obviously not looking good. I had to be honest, this is really difficult, and I gave a lot of elbow room for nations since the beginning of the war, because I recognise it's easy to sit off to the side if you are not contracted to Russia and aren't energy dependent on Russia, to look at someone else who is and go, why haven't you stopped taking on Russian oil? Why are you still paying Russian money when they're contracted to? And if you just turned off the gas, you'd be paying Russia the money still, but having to get gas from somewhere else, and your nation would have no energy. So it's really, really freaking difficult. But I do also understand the criticisms, because France need to do everything they can to wean themselves off. Germany have done it successfully and they wean themselves off really quickly, but I don't know where their contract stood with Russia compared to France. Can France learn anything from Germany? Is it the same or different situation? There might be a lot to do with the Nord Stream gas pipeline, whereas that I don't think is the case with France. France, quote, France insists its gas buys are necessary, this is from the article, to keep supplies flowing to households across Europe, and that it's locked into a long-term agreement with Russia that is legally complex to escape. But critics said Paris could do more to reduce the bloc's purchases, arguing its inaction to partly down to resistance from France's national energy major, Total Energies. So there's a lot of lobbying, a lot of influence going to be happening from fossil fuel company Total Energies that are putting pressure on the French government. And obviously, there's that fine balance between doing what's morally right and what's practically feasible. And when you have pressure from a huge player in the French economy, and thus French politics. But France is far from the only culprit. At least 9 countries continue to buy Russian LNG, the shipping data showed, but Paris led the bloc in both absolute volumes imported in 2024, 1.5 million tonnes in total, and the increase in purchases compared to the same period last year. So the problem is they've gone up in purchases as well. And this data, so the worst countries are Spain, France, Belgium and the Netherlands. And you have Portugal, Finland and Greece, fairly bad, then Italy, and then Germany and a couple of the Baltic nations. And of course, we know how strongly the Baltics despise Russia at the moment, politically speaking, and yet even they are taking gas from Russia and spending money there because you can't just turn it off. So 2 years sounds like a long time, but when you have these long-term contracts and when you understand how long it takes to get gas from elsewhere, then these things become difficult. Now, the US has stepped up and has become a really big LNG importer into Europe. I don't know if more can be made of that, because I think they've put a bit of a hold on those, the Biden administration, so we'll see where that goes. But that is certainly a problem for the French there. There's just a little bit of a quote here from a Russian escaping into France. I'm against Putin's politics, so I was one of the first to receive a military summons. I left immediately. I can't go back to my country because it's no longer Russia. It's a madhouse. Since July 2023, France has granted asylum to 68 Russian deserters. These deserters are condemned to live in the shadows and avoid Russian intelligence. They have to jump through lots of hoops to do that and prove that they believe in the things they do and who they are. But there's not everyone agrees on how these refugees should be treated. So people escaping conscription effectively, or mobilization, are saying that they are they are refugees? Is this more out of self-preservation in terms of just, I don't want to go to a war where I'm more likely to be killed than I otherwise would have been, and am I going to dress this up as me being anti the war and therefore a kind of refugee in that way? Like, is that genuine? What's going on? What are your genuine feelings? There are some nations who don't accept, I think, refugees that are trying to escape the war and say, you need to go back and cause dissent in your own country to make a change there. But, in the same way that we can't accept someone from another country as a asylum seeker if they're just running away from their normal conscription, like Finnish conscription, for example. And so I don't know. It's a difficult one. It's not as clear cut as you might think, and there are different countries. The countries have different approaches to this, but France are taking on those refugees. Not a huge number, 68, but still, there is that. Swiss government has announced that there's an international peace summit to begin the international peace summit on Ukraine on the 15th to 16th of June in Bergenstock resort near Lucerne. I've been to Lucerne. One of my best mates lives there with his Swiss-Slovakian wife. So there you go. Interesting. Or not. Imagine the Speaker of the House refusing to meet with the Foreign Minister of our most important ally. Absolute legislative malpractice. Really, there are no words. The House of Representatives is an embarrassing joke. Would love to get a peek into the reporting from their embassy. Well, this is the news I reported yesterday that Mike Johnson has refused to meet David Cameron, even though Cameron, the Foreign Minister for the UK, has met with Trump in Mar-a-Lago. And now we hear that Mike Johnson's gone to Mar-a-Lago to meet Donald Trump. I don't want to get onto this whole argument about whether I'm spouting disinformation to say Trump isn't up for supporting Ukraine, but I think all the data is pretty much in there. If I have time, I'll try and do a video later on that. Now, there's still this issue, and we're going to return to this in a second, of the impasse in Congress. But Congress must let Ukraine win, says a letter signed by famous people of the world. So 35 artists, activists, scientists and other celebrities have signed a letter to appeal to US Congress to approve aid to Ukraine. Together, we urge Congress to do the right thing. More than 470 days has passed since the Congress passed the law in support of Ukraine. We are letting Ukrainians down. And that's people like Barbara Streisand, Sean Penn, Imagine Dragons, Timothy Snyder, all sorts of people. And you got people that appeal to the old, like Barbara Streisand and Imagine Dragons, the younger demographic, as they very openly in their concerts espouse support for Ukraine, wearing a Ukraine flag, all that kind of stuff. You need to keep it. It's not that it's going to change Congress's mind. It's a bit like David Cameron going to meet Trump. It's not going to change his mind, but it's about keeping it in the public consciousness outside of maybe those immediate people who are not going to change their mind. And that means there are congressmen who are already going to support Ukraine no matter what. And so this is not doing anything for them, but it's people on the side, people out there in the public. It's about keeping the conversations rolling, and hopefully all those people are appealing to their own individual audiences. Now we're going to drop into something that is connected to Russia in terms of security, national security in the US, and this is concerning the Pfizer ruling. This is an opinion piece in the Washington Post. A vital intelligence tool needs reauthorization. The House might wreck it instead. And this is from the editorial board at the paper. The House plans to consider a measure this week reauthorizing Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA. The law governing how federal agencies may collect and use data collected from overseas targets must be reauthorized, as it was in 2012 and 2017. Yet this time there is a pronounced danger that, in an understandable drive to strike the right balance between privacy and security, lawmakers could hollow out, rather than sensibly reform, an important tool to combat terrorism, cyber attacks and espionage. And this includes the Russian influence in Congress, for example. I think that the particularly like the Freedom Caucus and people involved with that kind of politics, the MAGA wing of the Republican Party, are the most likely to be being influenced by outside actors, and they are the ones spouting Russian propaganda. They're all the ones shouting about this and wanting it closed down or changed to be unworkable, essentially. So let's look in a little bit more detail. The House is planning a vote on an amendment from Representative Andy Biggs, Republican, Arizona, that would require the FBI to secure warrants before searching lawfully collected foreign intelligence data for references to Americans. This is data that the National Security Agency gathers not in bulk, but on specific non-Americans believed to be operating outside the country and likely to communicate foreign intelligence information. Okay, so this has been used previously from 9/11 onwards, right? This was hunting down leaders of ISIS and Al-Qaeda and so on and so forth. It has been misused. And as a result of it being misused, the FBI has come under a lot of pressure and has made the changes itself. And actually, this new reauthorization of the bill will codify the changes the FBI have done. And the changes the FBI have done are good, and they should suffice for the recodification. For the reauthorization. However, there are lots of people shouting about this because they want to. The cynic in me was saying they want to make it easier to accept outside influence themselves and not be held accountable for it. And let's have this under the guise of privacy, etc., etc. A chastened FBI, after the misuses, implemented many changes to prevent misuse, to the point where audits have now shown that virtually all of those uses of the 702 have complied with the rules. The FBI has also established escalating consequences for misusing the system, from taking away access to criminal referrals. The House bill under consideration this week would codify into law every change the FBI made, so the next administration couldn't unwind them. It would also ban the Bureau from running searches for evidence of crimes unrelated to national security. That's one of the big issues. Require an FBI supervisor or attorney to approve all US person searches, and prohibit political appointees from being involved in the approval process. So you're trying to take politics out of this. In addition, it would tighten up the part of the FISA law that federal investigators abused during the 2016 campaign to authorize surveillance on Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. So none of that would be able to happen now. So that should do it. But civil libertarians should take that win. Instead, they're insisting on a warrant requirement that could cripple the program. Getting a warrant can take days or weeks, as exceptions written into the warrant proposal to allow searches when there's an imminent threat for certain cybersecurity purposes or of the US person's consent are too narrow and impractical. The data gathered under 702 has typically been most useful in the early stages of an investigation. So basically, it's most useful 702 when you don't have to go through the rigmarole of getting warrants, and you get the most useful information by just going in, doing these searches, catching people unaware, before probable cause can be established. At that stage, agents often know little about a US person of potential interest beyond that they're interacting with or being talked about by a foreign intelligence target. This is exactly the sort of thing we're talking about with regard to Russian interference. So all the stuff I'm banging on about Russian interference, if the people get their way in Congress at the moment, the Freedom Caucus sort of people, then it will become more difficult for Congress people, for example, to be held accountable under the suspicion of foreign interference. So, wondering whether Marjorie Taylor Greene is getting any kickback. You wouldn't be able to go and do searches without warrants, and then it'll all be cleaned up and blah, blah, blah. Imposing a warrant requirement risks re-erecting the wall that existed between domestic law enforcement and foreign intelligence gathering before September the 11th, 2001. The House should embrace 702 reform, but not the mistakes of the past. And then when you go back to look at Jane Kiev saying here, why would the Russian government, Russian troll factories, the Russian government's Western paid influencers and MAGA Republicans be so concerned about the federal government having the tools to expose traitors on the payrolls of hostile foreign regimes? Well, everyone, it's like a troll factory here. They all just say the same thing. Get a warrant, Pfizer. Get a warrant, Pfizer. Who's saying all this? Matt Gaetz, Jim Jordan, Lauren Boebert, Andy Biggs. It's all the same people. Matt Rosendale. Just, goodness me, Edward Snowden. And Donald Trump, of course, kill Pfizer. It was illegally used against me and many others. They spied on my campaign. Now, I'm not talking about the illegality of it being used with regard to Trump. I actually don't know enough about that, to be perfectly honest. But the claim is that has now been sewn up. That would not be able to happen with the bill if it codifies in the FBI changes that they've made to how it's applied. It's just, another frustrating moment where America seems to be saying, how can we make it easier for Russia to influence the world? How can we make it easier for Russia to influence our own political landscape? Reuters is now reporting that Trump says he won't go to Ukraine, so he's offered to go to Ukraine. I had someone I was arguing with over the last few days saying, there are some rumors that Trump is warming to the idea of going to Ukraine. I was like, not sure. Actually, no. He's basically said no. The US presidential candidate, Donald Trump, says it's inappropriate for him to visit Ukraine as he does not hold office, which is complete bollocks because loads of non-office holding politicians and opposition politicians have. Chris Christie went there, for God's sake, when he was running for president. So just that's a load of nonsense. Now, we might wonder what procedurally is going on when Mike Johnson doesn't take the bill for Ukraine aid to the floor. I just want to give you a bit of information on how it kind of works in Congress, because I think this is really important.
You were over there, so talk about what some of those options are. To me, as an insider outsider, right, as somebody who knows Washington but doesn't know the Hill stuff, I'm like, why are these guys getting circles run around them by Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene? Like, it doesn't seem like it's that hard to exert your will if morons like Marjorie Taylor Greene can do it,
This is Tim Miller, who's a conservative, talking to Adam Kinzinger, who's a former Republican lawmaker. So just to give you the context of who these people are, they are conservatives, they're not like Democrats or anything.
So what could they do? Why aren't they doing it?
I can get long-winded on.
Although I think both of them are going to vote Biden this election because they're so anti-Trump, but I just had to add that.
This, so if I am,
that's
just
okay.
Give me a signal, right?
Yeah,
okay.
right.
Here's the thing. When you go to Congress, the first thing they tell you is, on procedural votes. Now, procedural votes are things like rules. Rules, you have to vote on a rule before any bill or any action on the floor happens. So it's basically the House saying, okay, here's how many minutes of debate, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
Okay. So anytime there's a bill that comes on the floor, there has to be a rule vote. Then you have things like
before the bill vote, before any
before the bill
amendments,
vote,
before any motions. Okay.
And before the discussions. Yep. And so that's one thing. Then you have other stuff, which I won't go into, called like motions to recommit, whatever. All that is called procedural votes. Okay. What it means, it's just governs procedure. When you go to Congress, you're the party. Your party says, look, we all have to vote together on these issues. And that was the agreement. Like, you can disagree with the bill, but you gotta support your party on the floor rules. The Freedom Caucus is the ones that started violating that really for the first time, at least in modern history, where they now will vote against.
Oops, sorry, that's me making a mistake. We'll go back to that.
Time, at least in modern history, where they now will vote against rules. And what that does is it can shut down the floor from doing anything. So imagine being in DC for 2 weeks, and now you have a group of people saying the floor can do nothing, including even really come into session. So that's why they have such power. So if there's a group of 10 of us sitting in a room and I hand everybody a hand grenade.
So just really quick, before we get to the hand grenade analogy for the layman out there. So the Freedom Caucus is shut down. So when people hear that Mike Johnson isn't bringing something to the floor, part of that is the speaker's discretion, but part of that is because there's a group of people that are like, no, we're not going to let you bring it to the floor because we'll vote down the rule. Right? Yeah. That's essentially how it's going.
We'll vote down the rule, and you'll see that in some of the keep the government open stuff. Yeah. Or they'll, as you see right now, softly threaten him with a motion to vacate. And he doesn't want to get vacated. And so that's why he's kind of paralyzed. And I think he is paralyzed right now, to be honest with you. And so, but if you put 10 people in a room, I give everybody a hand grenade. We all have the equal amount of power, right? None of us will want to pull the pin on that hand grenade. But if there is a psycho in that room that wants to all of a sudden pull the pin on that hand grenade, they become the most powerful person, even though we all have the same tools. And that's what you've seen in the Freedom Club. I call them the Freedom Club. It's like there's nothing serious about them.
They're not a caucus. They haven't earned the right to be a caucus.
No. You got to be a respectable American for that. But
just to let you know, the Freedom Caucus, for those who aren't American, don't know what they are, or the House Freedom Caucus, a congressional caucus consisting of Republican members of the U.S. States House of Representatives, generally considered to be the most conservative and furthest right bloc of the chamber. It's formed in January 2015 by a group of conservatives of the Tea Party movement members with the aim of pushing Republican leadership to the right. Its first chairperson, Jim Jordan, if you know what I mean, described the caucus as a smaller, more cohesive, more agile and more active group of conservative representatives. I mean, it really is pretty much your extreme. So it's not your moderate Republicans, but it is many of the people I mentioned earlier.
They are willing to pull the pin on the hand grenade. And the problem is, like, until you call their bluff and one of the 10 pulls the hand grenade, until you're willing to be like, all right, I can play this game too and see if they're very serious, they're always going to be the most powerful person. So that's the moment with the Ukraine stuff right now. You have discharge petitions, which I can get into if you're curious, but those are pending. Neither of those are going to pass. What can really happen to compel this is if just 2, maybe it takes 3, it depends how many are in DC that day, sane Republicans go to the Speaker of the House and say, we, like the Freedom Caucus does, we will vote against every rule with the Democrats that comes to the floor until you agree to put the aid package on the floor for an up or down vote. He would be forced to do that, by the way, because now
there are certain things you can do. You can suspend rules votes, so suspension bills, which I think is a way of getting expediting a bill without voting on the procedures. But yeah, basically, this is one of the ways that you can hold things up. It's not exactly how the Ukraine aid bill is being held up at the moment. That is just Mike Johnson. But what he's saying is that people like Mike Gallagher and Ken Buck, who have taken a step back and resigned, they could have actually stayed and done something about. They could have got together, just a few of them, and made it really difficult for the rest of the Republicans and said, we want this Ukraine aid to get to the floor. The reason he goes on to say later that they didn't is because it wasn't in their financial interest. So if you end up pissing off all the people in these areas and maybe some of these lobbying companies as well, then you end up not being able to get a job after you do eventually resign. So, it's all about financially sorting yourselves out going forward.
Thing could happen on the floor, and it would actually give Speaker Johnson cover to get this done, because he'd be like, I have to, guys. But nobody's got the courage to do it. I don't get it. This is like, if I was still in DC, Tim, this is the one thing I would be doing, is voting against every rule. I would be staying in DC. I would be on every microphone, which I'm good at, and just be like, I'm going to shut down the floor until they put this on the floor for a vote.
Help me understand the psychology.
And that's what he goes on to talk about there. So that just gives you a little bit more insight into what's going on there. Moving to China. China dismisses criticism over Russian ties, says it has a right to normal cooperation. And that's what it's doing with its interactions with Russia. That's after many people have been criticizing Russia for criticizing China for helping Russia an awful lot more, particularly in terms of, I think, satellite imagery and intelligence. And I'm fairly sure that's why Russia are having much greater success in the strikes they're having at the moment, both on the battlefield in things like so possibly another S-300's been hit today. So those kind of strikes, as well as strikes onto energy infrastructure and whatnot. Moving to Europe, Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez said in an address in Parliament on April the 10th that the EU needs to increase its defence spending in the face of the threat from Russia. It's not saying to spend it on Ukraine, but just in general, which I think by extension will help Ukraine. They are the 4th biggest economy in Europe and then the 4th biggest army, but they don't spend in line with those standings, and that's what Pedro Sanchez is saying they should do, and I would agree with that. Ukraine and Latvia signed a bilateral security agreement. Now, this is interesting. According to the agreement, Latvia pledges to provide 0.25% of its GDP to assistance for Ukraine every year. Latvia also promised 10-year support for Ukraine in cyber defense, demining, and unmanned systems. Wow, if we all did 0.25% of our GDP in assistance to Ukraine would have no problem at all. Well done to the Baltics. Denis Shmyhal, the Prime Minister of Ukraine, is visiting Slovakia. Of course, Slovakia is becoming increasingly in the sphere of influence. Now it has a president and a prime minister who are both pro-Russian into the sphere of influence of Russia. And that is challenging for Ukraine. Ukraine is rightfully going over there and trying to change that trajectory. I don't know how much effect Shmyhal will have. Hungarian, and talking about similar countries there, Hungarian rulership Optima Forma here. So if it's extended, Hungary has extended a state of emergency for another 6 months due to the war in Ukraine by a Fidesz, that's the ruling party majority in parliament. In Hungary, the state of emergency has been going for more than 4 years. It allows the government, who knew? Why would you want to be in a state of emergency? Why extend it for 6 years? It's 6 more months. Oh, because it allows the government to take more power. Oh, right. So, yeah, authoritarian predilections there. It's just sliding towards autocracy. And a US official has said that there is deepening cooperation with Moldova amid potential threats from Russia. If you remember, the EU announced yesterday there's going to be lethal aid going to Moldova now, which is really good news for Moldovan security going forward. They are being influenced quite a lot by Russia, particularly in Transnistria and Gagauzia, the regions in Moldova that Russia is attempting to cut off from Moldova. US is deepening cooperation with the Moldovan government amid potential threats from Russia to undermine its stability, according to Ned Price, a deputy to the US representative of the UN. Quote, "We are redoubling our cooperation with the Moldovan government and other governments in the region to spot any such activity on the part of the Russian government." What would be interesting if people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and so on, the Freedom Caucus, were to listen to this, because surely they'd be like, you shouldn't be doing that, because they are siding with Russia against Ukraine, right? Why aren't they siding with Russia against everyone? Why don't they just move to Russia, to be honest? Just go to Russia, please. Verkhovna Rada ratified the free trade agreement between Ukraine and Canada, so good news there. Continuation of trading between those two countries without tariffs. And then I'm going to leave you with this thread on what General Cavoli said, and I would love him to have talked to the Freedom Caucus, to talk to Marjorie Taylor Greene and the like. What do you think about this? Be surrounded by the guy in charge of the armed forces in Europe, be talked to by head of intelligence, head of this, head of that. They're going to be singing off the same song sheet. This is talking about geopolitics, military aid, all sorts of stuff, but I'm going to add it to this video. So Ukraine cannot sustain this fight alone, he said. The United States, our allies and partners, must continue to provide Ukraine with munitions, weapons and material. Yep, okay, we know that. Okay. On Russia relies on the mass and quantity available to a large country, and despite its military's evident deficiencies and dysfunctions, it does continue to pose an existential threat to Ukraine. Yep, just see the missiles hammering Ukraine over the last month. During this conflict, Russia's strategic forces, long-range aviation, cyber capabilities, space capabilities, and capabilities in the electromagnetic spectrum have lost no capability at all. The Air Force has lost some aircraft, but only about 10% of its fleet. The Navy has suffered significantly in the Black Sea, but nowhere else. And indeed, the Russian naval activity worldwide is at a significant peak. So yeah, they've been battered in the Black Sea, but it's a very strong Navy otherwise. Russia has suffered, losing over 2,000 tanks and 315,000 soldiers wounded or dead. However, Russia is reconstituting that force far faster than our initial estimates suggested. The army is actually now larger by 15% than it was when it invaded Ukraine. Over the past year, Russia increased its frontline troop strength from 360,000 to 470,000. Now, I don't know if that takes into account the losses at all, and whether the Russians not accepting their losses means that you have a skewed perception of how many troops they actually have. So I don't know if those figures there can be taken at face value for what Cavoli says. I just need to do a bit of questioning around that. But nonetheless, the idea is that Russia is still a big old force. Regardless of the outcome of the war in Ukraine, Russia will be larger, more lethal, and angrier with the West than when it invaded. On Russia, People's Republic of China and Democratic People's Republic of Korea. So that's on Russia, China, and North Korea and Iran. That bloc of adversaries is more cohesive and dangerous than any threat to the United States has faced in decades. That needs to be That there is your headline statement to Congress. Everyone in Congress should be listening to that and reacting to it. What are you doing about it, MTG? What are you doing about it? Oh, no, you're appealing to those adversaries to prevail over Ukraine. Oh, yeah, that's what you're doing about it. The PLC, Iran and DPRK are sustaining Russia's economy and enabling it to continue its aggression in Ukraine. This new axis of adversaries will create strategic dilemmas within an increasingly challenging international security environment. As of March 2024, that North Korea provided Russia with roughly 6,700, and that's now up to 7,000, I think, containers that could contain up to 3 million artillery shells. Iran has provided Russia with drones, artillery and missiles that have enhanced Russia's lethality in Ukraine. This new axis of adversaries will create strategic dilemmas within an increasingly challenging international security environment. On China, certainly China is closely watching the conflict in Ukraine, he says, learning military lessons, political lessons, and trying to project those onto China's own interests. Moreover, China's increased support for Russia reveals the depths of the Chinese Communist Party's commitments to partnerships that challenge our collective security. The continued no limits partnership between China and Russia positions China as a formidable adversary to European interests. The partnership is not just diplomatic, it extends to informational, economic and military realms, aiding nations that exhibit hostility and aggression. Additional points are that he said, and we heard that artillery usage is 5-1 of Russian to Ukrainian artillery shells usage, and that will go up to 10-1 in a matter of weeks. And we're not talking about months there. The situation is extremely serious. The biggest killer on the battlefield is artillery. And should Ukraine run out, they would run out because we stopped supplying. If we do not continue to support Ukraine, Ukraine will run out of artillery shells and will run out of air defense interceptors in a fairly short order. I can't predict the future, but I can do simple math. Based on my experience in 37 plus years in the US military, if one side can shoot and the other side can't shoot back, the side that can't shoot back loses. The US provides the lion's share of 155mm caliber artillery shells to Ukraine and is also the main supplier of the country's ground-based air defense and most critical things on the battlefield. Russia's frequent large-scale missile attacks on Ukraine are expected to become more devastating as Ukraine's supply of interceptors for air defences dwindles. Those attacks would absolutely cripple the economy and the civil society as well as the military of Ukraine if they were not defended against. Without US provision of interceptors, that will happen. So in other words, without US's help, Ukraine is screwed, is essentially the TLDR of that. Really important rhetoric and claims there from General Cavoli. Anyway, thank you for listening. I really do appreciate your patience. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.